All right, welcome back to ABA exam review in our latest RBT practice exam, where we're going through the next set of questions together, breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack and our practice question bank. As always, when you pass, let us know so we can include you in our Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. You've been a behavior technician for 3 months now. You want to learn more about what a behavior analyst does, so you ask your supervisor if you can assist with a functional behavior assessment. Your supervisor says yes and asks you to interview the stakeholders. What type of data are you taking? Relatively long question, but not overly difficult. The question is asking you about the type of data that you are taking. So we need to look at your behavior and what you are doing. You know you're conducting or helping conduct a functional behavior assessment. Typically with an FBA, we'll do some indirect data, some interview stuff, and then some direct observation, and maybe even a functional analysis. In your case, you are going to be interviewing the stakeholders. So if you're conducting the interview, what type of data is that? A, functional analysis. Now, don't get functional analysis and a functional behavior assessment confused. FBA is kind of the overarching umbrella, right? Functional analysis can be a component of the FBA if we choose, but they're two different things. And a functional analysis is direct. Okay, we're observing, we're manipulating, we've got to be with the client. Same thing with B, direct. Direct is part of an FBA, but it involves actually observing the client or the learner. In this case, you're doing neither, right? You're interviewing the stakeholders in interviews and surveys and checklists and vignettes and these type of things where you're not actually observing the client or the learner. It's always going to be indirect data. Something to remember is we never want a FBA without direct data as well. Indirect data is great. Interviews are great. It gives us information, but we still need to directly observe the client at some point. Your supervising behavior analyst is out of town for the week. She texts you and asks if you're able to graph a few days of data for her and that it shouldn't take too long. If you were to graph the data using the most common type of graph in ABA, what would you use? Let's not overthink this question. We need to ask ourselves, what does the question want to know, basically? And all this other stuff is great, but all the question wants to know is, if you were to graph the data using the most common type of graph in ABA, what would you use? And that's the question you're answering, right? Because it starts out as almost kind of an ethical question, right? She wants you to graph this data, and there's a lot of components that go along with you assisting your behavior analyst in graphing data, but it's not what the question is asking about. That's why you need to answer just the question. The question wants to know, what graph are you using? What's the most common type, right? And the most common type of graph in ABA is a line graph. Almost every single graph you look at in ABA is going to be a line graph. Occasionally, you might see a scatter plot. Bar graphs and histograms, not too often, but line graphs, yes, line graphs are the most common, especially if you use any sort of data collection system as an app or through technology that graphs data for you. They all use line graphs, okay? Line graphs are the most common type of graph in ABA. Whether you use a single stimulus assessment, forced choice assessment, or multiple stimulus assessment, the ultimate goal of a stimulus preference assessment is what? Okay, we're looking for the ultimate goal of a stimulus preference assessment. We're not concerned with the type. We can use a single stimulus assessment, we can use a forced choice assessment, and we can even use a multiple stimulus assessment. It's irrelevant. The question wants to know, what are you trying to accomplish or achieve using these different types of assessments? A, identify reinforcers for the client. Now, you have to ask yourself, if you conduct a preference assessment, and let's say the client prefers an item, does that make it a reinforcer? It does not. What makes an item a reinforcer? What makes an item a reinforcer is how it changes behavior. And I can prefer Sprite, I can prefer chocolate cake, I can prefer going for a run. If those things don't change my behavior in any way, then they're just preferences. They're not reinforcers. Preference assessments alone do not identify reinforcers. What they do is identify potential reinforcers for the client. So now, through a preference assessment, we can create a list or a hierarchy of all these different things the client likes and prefers, and then we can conduct reinforcer assessments to actually determine which one of these things will change behavior. C, identify target behaviors for the treatment plan. Preference assessments are not about identifying target behaviors. And then identify the function of target behaviors. Again, preference assessments are not about the function. They're not about the target behaviors. We're trying to identify potential reinforcers so we can do a reinforcer assessment later on. Jay plans on using a whole interval measuring system to measure his client's behavior in the classroom. Initially, each interval was 30 seconds, but now each interval is 2 minutes. What is likely to happen if the interval length increases in discontinuous measurement? This is a technical question. It requires a little bit of thought on your part. Now, the question is asking about interval length and discontinuous measurement. And if we think about our discontinuous measurements, we have interval recordings, partial and whole. We have time sampling, momentary time sampling. And all of those, right, we take a quantity of time, maybe 20, 30 minutes, and then we break it into intervals, right? 10-second intervals, 30-second, whatever it might be. That's how discontinuous measurement works. It's discontinuous because we aren't continuously tracking behavior. Now, what happens if we continue to increase the length of the interval? Well, if you think about it, let's say we're using a whole interval measuring system. If we're using a whole interval measuring system, the behavior has to happen the entire time to count. So if I have a 30-second interval, it's much more likely that the behavior will happen that full time than it is for 2 minutes. And let's say we take 2 minutes and turn it into a 5-minute interval and then a 10-minute interval. The odds of us getting good, accurate data continue to decrease because the interval just gets too long. Either the client or the learner has to engage in the behavior in the whole interval system for the whole 10 minutes or whatever it is, or it doesn't count at all. So when using discontinuous measurement, we have to be smart about the interval length because as they increase, what happens? A, the data becomes more accurate. Well, no, the data becomes less accurate. We're getting less accurate data as those interval lengths increase. The target behavior doesn't necessarily change, and the interval length does not matter in discontinuous measurement. It's just false. If you increase the interval length, the data becomes less accurate. Think about partial interval data, right? If I have a 10-second interval, if the behavior happens at all during the 10 seconds, it counts. What if my interval is 5 minutes? Well, your odds of getting data go up dramatically, but is that a true reflection? Less and less likely as the interval increases. So that's a technical question, right? It's not the easiest question. So just think about it, understand the concepts, okay? And try to really understand why that's true. If we increase the interval length, why does that make the data less accurate? Which of the following is not true about an antecedent intervention? All right, couple important things. Not true question, meaning 3 of these will be true, 1 won't. And we're talking about antecedent interventions. So an antecedent is what? An antecedent happens prior to a response, prior to a behavior. So it has to happen before the behavior or the response. So we're looking for something that is not true about an intervention that happens prior to the response. A, it occurs prior to the learner's response. Well, we just said that 3 or 4 times. We know A is true. B, it is meant to be a proactive strategy. It is. With an antecedent intervention, you're intervening before responses happen. You're being proactive about behavior management. C, it can be used to prevent behavior. Well, sure, if we're being proactive before the behavior occurs and we're successful, we can sometimes prevent behavior from occurring. That's the whole idea. What about D? It can be done in reaction to a behavior. Well, that's just not possible because an antecedent is going to come before a behavior. What comes after a behavior? Well, a consequence intervention. So antecedent interventions and consequence interventions serve 2 separate purposes. They're 2 very different things. What's not true about an antecedent intervention? Well, it can be done in reaction to a behavior. No, that is a consequence intervention. Blaze is running shape ID. He tells his client to touch triangle and the client touches their ears. Blaze says touch circle and points to the circle. Client does, and Blaze says nice touching circle, then waits and then starts a new trial. What did Blaze do wrong? All right, question is asking, what did Blaze do wrong? He's clearly running some discrete trials. Okay, he's running shape ID. First trial, touch triangle, client incorrect. Second trial, touch circle, points to the circle, client does, Blaze says nice touching circle. So we have our antecedent, touch circle. We have our prompt, points to circle. We have the response. We have the consequence, nice touching, and then our pause. In discrete trial training, did Blaze do anything wrong? Well, to me, that looks pretty good, right? He delivers an antecedent. The prompt that he delivers comes between the antecedent and the response. Blaze delivers his feedback, his consequence, and identifies the correct behavior. And then there's a post-trial pause. And then he goes into a new one. Looks pretty good. So A, the prompt is in the wrong place. It's not. We have an antecedent, prompt, response, which is the correct order. His feedback was incorrect. Well, no, he gave praise and he specified his praise, right? We always want to specify what it is we're praising. He paused in between trials. You're supposed to pause in between trials. Don't forget the post-trial pause. So what did Blaze do wrong? Well, actually, nothing. Blaze did a good job delivering a discrete trial. All of the following child or client behaviors are maintained by automatic reinforcement. Which of the following examples does not represent extinction of behavior maintained by automatic reinforcement? All right. Question is clearly about automatic reinforcement. All of these behaviors, their function, automatic reinforcement, meaning what? Meaning it happens with the help of nobody else, quote unquote, feels good, right? It's a sensation, all these things. So they're asking, how do you put these type of behaviors on extinction? Well, to put automatic behavior on extinction, you've got to block the sensation, which makes automatic behavior very difficult to treat at times. Because since it's happening without the assistance of somebody else, well, you've got to prevent some sensation of the person from happening. It's difficult. The question is asking, all the examples right here, what does not represent extinction of behavior maintained by automatic reinforcement? So a child who scratches himself until he bleeds wears a rubber glove which prevents his nails from contacting the skin. So if the client wears the rubber glove, he can't make himself bleed, but he can still scratch himself. So we're not blocking the response, we're blocking the sensation. A looks good. B, a mom turns her car window lock on to prevent her children from rolling down the windows repeatedly. Kids can still try to roll down the window, so we're not preventing the response, but there's no sensation. The windows don't do anything. C, a technician puts her hand over the light switch each time her client attempts to flick the switch on and off. What's different about C from A and B? Well, A and B, we allow them to engage in the response. It just doesn't produce the reinforcement. C, the technician is blocking the response from occurring. And we can't block the response from occurring to put it on extinction. By definition, extinction is when a response doesn't receive reinforcement. If a response doesn't occur, then we can't withhold reinforcement. So response blocking is not extinction. And then D, a client stomps his feet as loud as he can in the bathroom, so his dad put down a rug to dampen the sound. Same thing, the client can still engage in the response, they get no feedback. The problem with C is it's response blocking, and response blocking is not extinction. To deliver extinction, the response must have an opportunity to occur. All right, look at the graph below. Using data points 1, 2, and 3, describe the trend of screaming. The reason I said all right is people see graphs and they start to panic. Here to tell you the graphing questions, if you get one, should be the easiest. They're super simple to read. So this is a line graph, the most common type of graph, right? There's a line in the middle, what we consider a condition change line, okay? And so we want to look at the graph below using data points 1, 2, and 3 and describe the trend. So let's first identify our data points. Well, if you look at the bottom, right, the x-axis, we have 1 through 7. So our data points will be 1, 2, and 3. Now we're describing trend. When talking about data on a graph, we can talk about trend, level, and variability. Trend is the direction our data is moving, right? Variability is how much difference is there between the highest and lowest point. So if you look at 4 through 7, pretty decent amount of variability, right? Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 8. We're talking about trend though. So what direction is this data moving? And we're talking 1, 2, and 3. Well, using visual analysis, just looking at it, how would you describe that trend? Well, there is no trend, right? It's completely flat. So an increasing trend? No, an increasing trend would be 4 to 5, right? It's moving upwards. A decreasing trend would be 5 to 6, moving downwards. No trend is what we have here. There's no trend at all, completely flat. Now, a variable trend, well, we would never describe a trend as variable. We can describe the data as variable, Okay. But trends are going to be increasing, decreasing, or none. Again, graphing questions are simply looking at the graph and talking about what you see. Very straightforward. This morning, you receive an email saying that Netflix is now going to prevent you from sharing your password. You immediately log into your Netflix account and cancel your subscription. You are no longer charged monthly and you never renew. What is the consequence relative to canceling your subscription? All right. Antecedent, consequence question, behavior question. Identify what we're looking at and what's going on around it. We're looking at a consequence, so what's coming after, relative to canceling subscription. So let's find canceling subscription. You immediately log. Here we go. You cancel your subscription. What is the antecedent? Well, the antecedent is going to be, right, logging into your account or seeing this email. Okay, basically, right? You see the email, you go to your account, you cancel. What's the consequence of canceling? Well, you're no longer charged. Okay, so in the future, you never renew your account. So the consequence for canceling your subscription is you're no longer charged a fee. So A, the email is an antecedent. Logging in, antecedent, they both happen prior. Not being charged monthly is a consequence. Not renewing is a consequence of not being charged monthly. The consequence of canceling the subscription is not being charged. Fantastic. Check out btexamreview.com. We now have our practice question bank available, almost over 650 questions and growing. So every week we add 8 to 10 new questions. So it just keeps growing and growing. 3-day free trial. We also, of course, have our combo pack, our famous combo pack, to help thousands of RBTs pass, and you could be next. So keep working hard, keep studying hard. See you soon.